So once again, thank you for your questions. It's really been very meaningful to me to see the variety of questions that you've offered, and I know I haven't been able to answer each one individually, but I hope that the overview has been helpful. And today I think, because it is the last full-length session, again, I'll try to make a balance between addressing questions that came up, but also there are things that I have wished to share with you that don't necessarily reflect the questions per se. Just to say a few practical things, again, about books and people. Someone asked about the name of the book that Lama Alan referred to regarding the Lama who was in a concentration camp for more than 20 years when he spoke of, he's referred to several different very important Lamas who were in concentration camp for a long time. But this one, the name of the person is Pelden Gyatso. Usually would be spelled P-E-L-D-E-N and then G-Y-A-T-S-O. So if you look that up, but I asked Lama Alan this, and he's pretty sure the name of the book is either Autobiography of a Buddhist Monk or Autobiography of a Tibetan Monk, something like that. So I think that's enough information to find it. And then someone just asked me about Lama Karma, to whom Lama Alan has referred a number of times during this retreat. I did meet him actually about a little over a year ago. And at that point, he was at Taramandala in Colorado in the United States. He's no longer there, so I don't know if there's any public information. I don't know if there's still a web page with his biography. Taramandala used to have it. But if anyone actually is interested in inviting him to Australia, please just get in touch with Sangye Wangmo at Santa Barbara Institute, info@sbinstitute.com, because she speaks Bhutanese, she is Bhutanese, and she has been in very close contact with him. So she'll know best where he is and how to be in touch with him. Extraordinary, extraordinary Lama and meditator. It was a great blessing to meet him myself. So those were two pieces of practical business, shall we say. I considered teaching the ninefold breathing, but I think it's not the most important thing with our time right now, because there are many, many lamas who teach it, and everyone teaches a little bit differently. So for those who have a practice, and I'll just do this so you know what I'm talking about, where the fingers go like this, it's in Hindu, Indian yoga, it's known as Nadi Shodhana, the clearing of the nadis, the channels. And it's very widely known. The Panchen Lama does refer to it as a preliminary for Guru Yoga and then the practice of Shamatha and Mahamudra. But it's not absolutely essential. And because the theme of this retreat has been so much focused on settling the breath in its natural state, settling the speech in its natural state, I actually don't want to confuse our energies, because I had done a lot of work with that kind of pranayama, physical yoga, inner yoga, and it took me a long time to actually switch modes into releasing into the natural state. And so I think almost as the theme of this retreat, I want to leave it alone. I want to leave it aside. On that note, I can answer very quickly one question about, can you ever settle body, speech, and mind all at once? For those of you who have listened to Lama Alan for a long time, at a certain point, especially in an 8-week retreat, he'll give you maybe 1 minute to settle body, speech, and mind. So he does expect us to reach the point where, especially if you're practicing many sessions a day, you sit down and you're there quite quickly, as a preliminary, not as the full meaning of settling the mind in its natural state, just the preliminary meaning. So that's the answer. Yes, eventually you can be doing all three at once. Your body is settling into a position, you're releasing your breath into its natural rhythm, and you're finding the stillness of awareness. And those don't necessarily have to be sequentially separated, even if you understand them conceptually separated, distinct. But there's a deeper meaning, as you've already know from settling the mind in its natural state. Actually doing that is reaching shamatha. And settling the speech in its natural state, there's an earlier section of Lerab Lingpa's text, which I think is at the beginning of these notes. It's not the same as his full teaching on settling the mind, its natural state, but where he refers to easing the flow of the breath until it's inaudible, until you can no longer sense it, and that Lama Alan mentioned early in this retreat. So I reiterate that as sometimes a very long process, which comes whether or not mindfulness of breathing is one's object of shamatha practice. If, for example, you're one of those people who loves the practice of settling the mind in its natural state, and you're not really paying much attention to the breathing, the breath, as you go deeper and deeper in your concentration on the flow of mental content, watching it, the breath should get subtler and subtler. So that's just a little commentary on that. When you're going full time for shamatha, these kinds of details are your whole life. So you're thinking about it all the time. Someone else asked, and this is well worth answering, if you're just doing a 24-minute session in the morning and another 24 session in the evening, do you actually have any hope of reaching shamatha? And Alan's answer to that during the lunch break was, well, I guess you'd have to be an Einstein of concentration to do so. In the sense that we have the story of Bahia, who heard one Dharma talk and becomes an arhat. That doesn't mean he started meditating that day. It means everything was in place so that his mind could enter the samadhi based on that teaching and realize emptiness and pass through all 4 stages to the stage of an arhat in the course of a few minutes. So even though there are many stories of what we might call instant enlightenment or immediate realization through all traditions of Buddhism, it exists for sure, but it always implies a very, very ripe being. And as we've started to discuss so explicitly the last few days, that means a huge amount of momentum from past lifetimes. So in general, the answer that Lama Alan received many years ago on this, and I checked with him, I remembered the fact, but I checked with him the name of the Lama. He's pretty sure it's Geshe Yeshe Topten, who was one of the yogis who lived, I think, for 30 years in retreat above Dharamsala. I saw his stupa, actually, his enlightenment stupa, very, very powerful place. And he said, if you're not in retreat, the minimum to actually reach shamatha would be 3 hours a day, just shamatha, not including all your other practices. And that's important to say because once you're at that intensity of practice, you might have 45 minutes or an hour of sadhana practice to do every day, and mantras, and guru yoga, and all these other things. So it doesn't mean 3 hours of cushion time, or 3 hours of practice including your yoga. It means 3 hours of shamatha meditation. And that makes sense based on the presentation of the stages we've just received. As Lama Alan has said explicitly, by the time you're at stage 7, normal is to be doing 2 to 3 hour sessions. And then from stage 8, 9, he didn't say it explicitly, but so many times he refers to the 4-hour standard, that no problem to be doing 4-hour sessions in perfect samadhi when you've actually reached shamatha. So it's part of the real settling of body, speech, and mind, the full settling, that it actually takes that much time for the body to stay, and speech and mind to stabilize. And if when sessions are consistently and always shorter than an hour, there isn't enough time for that depth of settling to take place. And when you are practicing shamatha very seriously, you start to see, again, it's this forward and back. Lama Alan is sometimes referred to this as like climbing a mountain in the scree, which is all the maybe use the same word in Australian. The rocks at a very high, above the tree line on a mountain, and you're sliding back in the gravel, that's the right word, the gravel on the mountain face. And so you take 3 steps forward, but you actually have only gotten as much forward as if you had taken half a step. And so the difficulty with reaching shamatha outside of retreat, although it's not impossible, is that as long as you're engaging in an outer life, as I mentioned the first day, you'll keep feeling like you're falling back in the scree. So that's I don't think too long way of answering. it is possible, theoretically, to reach shamatha outside of a formal retreat, but eventually one would have to have the kind of lifestyle that allowed for at least 3 to 4 hours a day in a row. I don't mean spread out over the day. I mean 3 hours straight to be at and to stabilize stages 7, 8, 9. So I wish I could say it was easy, but it's not. Pardon me. But then that relates to the question of how we integrate shamatha with sadhana practices, guru yoga practices, and so on. Because sometimes when you hear, oh, just pick one thing and go for it, as we talked about a few days ago, even with one's object of shamatha, when is it appropriate to say, now I've found my one practice and I will carry this all the way to the end of the road, as it were, of shamatha alone? Does that mean you give up all your other practices? Of course not. Apparently at the beginning of the one-year retreat in 1988 that Lama Rinpa led and Lama Alan translated and assisted at the beginning Lama Rinpa said to the retreatants, all your other practices are now in service of your shamatha. And I guess one could think of it this way. One still has to prepare food and eat. One still has to exercise basic sanitation, if not showers every day, which most yogis don't have the luxury of doing. But taking care of one's body, attending to its natural functions, eating, taking a walk, just as those things have to remain part of one's daily routine. So meditating on a Vajrayana sadhana is not a distraction from shamatha. I admit that there are times when it can feel as though you don't even want to use the conceptual mind that much to recite something or to visualize something. But the longer I have been in retreat personally, the less of a conflict that seems to be. And so I just offer that as, if you ever run into that and it seems like a conflict, just trust that that too will pass. So many things one thinks, oh, how am I going to get through this? And that too will pass. I'll speak more about these meditative experiences or nyam quite soon. So yes, of course one continues to practice a sadhana if one has that commitment or if one feels drawn to it. You may not have a sadhana commitment, you may just have a mantra commitment, but if you want to practice the sadhana, of course, let it enrich your practice. But on that note, I will say a little bit more about Vajrayana in general, because Lama Alan mentioned this morning this phrase, taking the result as the path, which is so classic to Vajrayana across the board, from what's known as the outer tantras all the way up to Dzogchen. And in general, what it means is that one, in a classical New Translation School version of Vajrayana, one is imagining the state of Buddhahood and imagining that it's already true, and then practicing that way. And it's very formalized in a script, shall we say, of a classical sadhana. But as you all know, or those of you who've ever received empowerment and attempted to practice that, there's a great, great danger here. Either to simply think, I'm imagining, and then it's so easy either to lose faith in it because you think, well, this is just imagination, what am I doing it for? Or to so believe your imagination that it starts to feel like, I don't know how to say, a game that's becoming real. And then one's whole life starts to be part of that game, but it hasn't been integrated. I could talk for hours on that point, but if you've been practicing sadhana, I think you know what I mean. Like being in a movie and you never quite get out of the movie, but you're not sure how it applies to your outer life. But both of those extremes, and the worst of that would be if one starts to gain a puffed up sense of pride in a totally ordinary sense, but you think it's your sadhana. That's what I mean. both of those extremes would come from an insufficient understanding of emptiness and an insufficient development of bodhicitta. So rather than focus on a wrong version, I just want to express in briefest terms how the foundation of a sadhana relates to the foundation of Guru Yoga, relates to the foundation of great perfection, relates to the goal of Shamatha practice in a Buddhist context. As I indicated yesterday, if one has a glimpse of the middle way view in which karma itself, not as in a name, but as in the seeds of our past actions, is stored, intimately related with the act of identifying me. Even in the bardo, there's a sense of I. Coming out of deep dreamless sleep, as the karmic energies start to activate, as you heard this morning, it's the sense of I that triggers the whole world of appearances to show up. But in the most sophisticated middle way view, karma itself is not self-existent, it's not planted in a place somewhere, it's not in a big treasury storehouse like pieces of grain. It's vibrations of energy that are associated with the act of labeling I, me. And so true Vajrayana practice, authentic Vajrayana practice, occurs when one has so deeply understood the emptiness of I. It sees the place where there's no inherent referent, and that label is free-floating. That label is available to be designated upon any layer of one's being. And so even if one has not yet realized pristine awareness as an experience, at least through faith and understanding that I'm not inherently the person I think I am at the most superficial level, I can place that label upon the deepest dimension of being, namely the Dharmakaya, pristine awareness manifest. So that means that if the referent of I, when one reads a sadhana and says, I am, is still caught up with our superficial sense of identity, the sadhana is a mere plaything. And I'll take the most generally known example. If one were to say, I am Avalokiteshvara, and one is associating this person, me, the conflict is irreconcilable because I am a limited person who has not done the deeds of Avalokiteshvara, who doesn't know how to do the deeds of Avalokiteshvara, whose name is not Avalokiteshvara, whose mind is not the full enlightened qualities of love and compassion that is Avalokiteshvara. So it is only by penetrating to the level of pristine awareness that we could even know what the basis of designation is for the I that arises as a classical deity in a Buddhist context in a sadhana. But this doesn't mean we don't practice a sadhana until we've realized pristine awareness. There is a tension here. If any of us is already practicing sadhana and realizes, I just don't understand emptiness well enough, it doesn't mean you stop practicing the sadhana, but it does mean one holds it very lightly, very gently. And there are ways of engaging with sadhana that it's a devotional practice in which you recognize the presence of all Buddhas within yourself. And if it feels false to say, I am, and you feel more of a devotion toward the presence of that truly sacred being within you, that's actually exactly what's going on in what's known as the outer tantras, the Kriya and Charya tantras. They engage with it at that level. It's a devotion where there's a merging with the being to whom one is devoted. And you understand that your emptiness is inseparable from the emptiness of that being. but you're not taking on necessarily the full divine pride as it's known of that being. Or you do for a very brief moment and then you stop the sadhana. It's beautiful, what are known as the Lower Tantras. I've had an opportunity to just study little bit of Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary on them. And I think for most of us, our most authentic engagement with Vajrayana is at the level of Kriya and Charya Tantra. And it's very humbling to recognize that. So likewise, with a guru, if one has identified one or more human beings to whom one has great devotion, faith, admiration, respect, the trust that this person knows what they're talking about and can transmit the Dharma authentically, and their behavior accords with the Dharma. As we know, if one then says, oh, and now I have to view this person as a Buddha, if one then assumes that every action that person ever undertakes will be perfect, we set ourselves up for disappointment, and then potentially failure in our own Guru Yoga practice if that disappointment means we lose faith in the Guru. So there is a healthy way of engaging Guru Yoga practice, and it's very closely related with a healthy way of engaging sadhana practice. And that is recognizing the Dharmakaya of the Guru. It's the same ground Dharmakaya that every single person has, that every single person is, because we are manifestations of pristine awareness. It's that ray, following that ray to its source, which is so essential to even comprehend this. But if one has the faith that that is true, and frankly one shouldn't be engaging in Vajrayana practice if one doesn't have some inkling of faith that there is a level of reality that is pure, that Dharmakaya pervades all things. But if one has the faith that every living being is endowed with a Buddha nature, that the Dharmakaya is present in every sentient being, and all the more so, well, I won't say all the more so, but easier to see how a human being can follow a path of purification to become a full Buddha, then the basis of designation for Buddha, when you look upon a guru, a qualified guru, is that person's Dharmakaya. It's not necessarily their outer activities. Now, the deeper one's devotion, the deeper one's understanding of the Dzogchen path, the deeper one's understanding of being able to see the purity that permeates everywhere, then also the individual actions of a guru may start to appear very naturally as pure, enlightened speech, actions, teaching, and so on. But as His Holiness the Dalai Lama has said very recently and very emphatically, that's an extremely advanced practice. And it is not appropriate to just stamp that kind of practice if we're not ready in all the other respects. So we have to have a robust understanding and motivation to be able to have those experiences in a genuine way. And so, as my own heart expression to you, it's healthy, it's wonderful to engage with a guru exactly at the level we feel comfortable with. And to let our practice take that deeper and deeper, not to try to feel we should have a certain kind of guru yoga, and then our practice will follow. You see what I'm saying? We actually have enough information at our fingertips now. We have practices in our bodies and our minds that can develop the ability to practice Guru Yoga at its most sublime level. But the reason I've been emphasizing, well, one of many reasons I've been emphasizing in our meditations, the possibility of an idealized archetypal figure visualized in our Guru Yoga, is that if we understand it properly, we know we're always engaging with that being when we engage with a qualified Vajrayana Lama in particular. And the degree to which a qualified Vajrayana Lama may not appear like a totally perfect Buddha, and we don't really know what a totally perfect Buddha would look like anyway. When in doubt, go back to the archetype. Go back to the symbolic manifestation of total Buddhahood. And as in this beautiful story of Jetsunma Tenzin Palmo in her winter retreat, when there was no possibility of communicating with an outer guru, she could pray and receive her answer. And actually all of us can. And that's what I want to encourage you. All of us can receive the answers we need from within our own practice and our prayer. It is vipassana, the understanding of emptiness, that will make the bridge from our shamatha to the realization of rigpa, pristine awareness. Because as I just said, if we're in any respect grasping, even to the substrate consciousness as me, and don't have the tools to break through the very subtle grasping that is always at play, while we're in the substrate consciousness, we can't make the plunge or the leap, however you like the symbolism, to pristine awareness itself. And so there's no skipping vipassana, actually. Some extremely gifted individuals who have the karmic momentum from past lives may be practicing awareness of awareness and spontaneously gain a realization of rigpa, but with that they will gain a realization of emptiness. It's not as though one would ever have skipped the effect of vipassana. And to be sustainable, not just a glimpse that becomes a memory. To be sustainable, one has to have the skills to go back and hammer away at our habitual propensities for grasping to a self, whether at the level of our coarse mind or the substrate consciousness itself. Because it is important to realize that reaching shamatha alone actually opens a doorway to an even more emphatic kind of grasping, which is to the bliss, non-conceptuality, and luminosity of the substrate consciousness itself. That's not been a main theme here, but Lerab Lingpa, or in his revelations, many times refers to what a tempting object of grasping shamatha itself can be. And so, at the right moment, vipassana can. He's just leaving. Please come back. At the right moment, well applied vipassana breaks through the grasping to the subject consciousness itself. The main thing then that I'd like to focus on is these anomalous experiences, the nyam, that come up later in the stages of shamatha. Of course, it's possible to have nyam as soon as one sits down on a cushion, but in general, the really intense ones will start to come stage 4, 5, 6. That's the prime time, shall we say, for bizarre experiences. And I'm sure many of you have encountered nyam of your own, and hearing the teaching on it is very reassuring in a way, because it makes us realize in retrospect, maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, oh, actually, that was just a nyam. I've been worrying about trying to figure out what happened. Don't worry about it. The whole fact that anomalous experiences should arise when one's practicing a lot, should arise when one's concentration can be sustained for an hour at a time. You're able to go that deeply into your consciousness, if not all the way to the substrate, you're at least accessing deeper levels of consciousness from which the purification of past karma can arise as these strange experiences. So in general, the advice, especially in terms of retreat, where something weird comes up and you wonder, what do I do next? If it has any hint of being a true medical issue, as in the practicality I said a few days ago, treat it with medical wisdom. And if you feel like there's a danger to your health in retreat, or you're meditating at home and you get high blood pressure, attend to it like any person in our contemporary world who reaches out for medical help. But when you have something that is undoubtedly strange happening to you, and you're completely checked out from a medical perspective, they've done all the tests, the doctor's looked at you and says, you're fine, there's nothing wrong with you. And you go back to the cushion, you go back to your shavasana, you're still having the experience. That's the best indication this is a nyam. Now, when one's been through 5, 10, 15 of these kinds of things, and they're all different, you start to recognize it really fast. And so you have more assurance of, no, my body's fine, I'm healthy, this is just something strange coming up. So that just comes with habituation, with experience, to be able to recognize a nyam as a nyam. Psychologically, of course, that's what settling the mind in its natural state puts us on high alert for. We're watching every single thing that goes by. So as long as we can maintain that distance, we just recognize, oh, this is a really strange one, but it's still going to pass. And it may not pass within 5 seconds. It may take hours, it may take days, it may take a couple of years. But the instruction in this lineage is always the same. And when I say this lineage, I mean the revelations of Lerab Lingpa in particular, but the Dzogchen Great Perfection teachings in general. And Mahamudra would have approached it the same way. Rest in the stillness of awareness and watch it release itself. And that takes courage. That's why I'm saying if you have any genuine doubt whether it's something that could be treated medically or with diet, exercise, etc., do what you need to do. But when one's in the process looking at it and saying, that's not actually going to help this, you gain the fortitude of resting in awareness and watching it pass, watching it release itself. So anything in the range of strange visions, dark energies, demons, numbness in the body, that does go away eventually, and then you get up and walk around and you're fine, but then maybe it happens more than once. Feeling disembodied, all those kinds of things, as long as they're transitory, can be identified as a nyam. So, again, a reason why it is important to have some kind of contact with a qualified guru, at least intermittently, so that if you've done everything you can and something's still disturbing you, you just check in, say, what does this sound like to you? And as in the Vajra essence, the Lake-born Vajra reveals, truly knowledgeable gurus may not certainly have experienced every kind of nyam because they're so individual to every practitioner, but they will have the wisdom to be able to identify it as such and thus help the person release it. And a guru who's realized pristine awareness, a Vijana, then has actual miraculous capacity to see so deeply into the mind stream of that disciple that they see exactly what the disciple needs to do to release the nyam. Because occasionally there's something to do, but for the most part, it's about not doing. It's about just staying in your practice, not wavering from your practice, whatever that object of meditation may be, and letting it cleanse itself. The question came up of, well, if your practice is awareness of awareness, is this throwing you off your meditation object? And I will say that from experience, most nyams seem to throw one off the object right away because they don't let you ignore them. they seem so powerful that it can be destabilizing at first. But you know you're making progress when, especially when settling the mind in its natural state, you actually realize, I'm still resting in the stillness of awareness, I'm still watching this arise, I'm doing the practice. I feel very unstable. I feel perhaps I'm sobbing. Perhaps immense emotion is coming out. Perhaps strange things are happening in the body. But and it may not feel like a great meditation at all, but if you can still identify the stillness of awareness and the movement of the mind, you haven't abandoned your practice. And one of the most insidious nyam, certainly that I've experienced, I've received a question about it, and I know that it can be very common in our particular cultural period. This may not have been an issue for many Tibetans through history, but low self-esteem actually takes the form of a full-on demonic power sometimes, because it's closely associated with afflictive uncertainty, because it's that very Mara of, and I'll put it the way it comes. It doesn't come as you, it comes as I. Because it comes as a voice that sounds like, oh, this is my thought. And to be able to separate from that enough to realize that's not my thought, that's something arising. But oh, I'm hopeless at this. I'm no good. Why am I bothering? I mean, really, hardly anybody reaches Shamatha anyway. Why should I be trying? Etc. We all know anything we've tried to sincerely do in life, that can come up. And I think our society adds to it right now. But the strongest antidote to that, if it seems to be so crushing that one can't even continue the practice as one had intended to, it's crushing one's very ability to meditate, face that Mara in the face, head on. What part of me are you aimed at? Who is the me you're saying is inadequate? Who is the me you're telling is a bad person? And that's one of many meanings of the subtle investigation, which is the fifth jhana factor. At times that can be quite conceptual. You're engaging it with questions and answers and logic. And that can be very, very useful at times to get to a certain point of realizing this is a voice that's arising, but it's not true, first of all, and it's not me, second of all. And then later on in that process, because this can take years to overcome, one can have enough distance from those thoughts that they can arise, and you don't even have to argue with them. They just come up and go, because one's resting in the stillness of awareness, and you know you fought that battle before. And you don't have to go fighting it all over again, because at that point, the Mara is saying, hey, look at me, I want to distract you and make you get all conceptual again. Just when you were starting to go deeper into non-conceptual state of meditation. I hope this is meaningful, because I think we'll all face it at some point. But where it leads, and this, again, is very personal, but I want to share it with you. For me, where this leads is in deeper humility. So low self-esteem is actually, and I will use the word self-loathing, because low self-esteem almost isn't strong enough to describe the way I think it comes up for many of us. The self-loathing, which has no basis in reality, is aimed at a me that's being grasped onto with the same kind of power that pride grasps onto it. So it's just two sides of a coin, two sides of a seesaw. Is this grasping going to manifest as inflated sense of self? And we know that. We know what it feels like inside ourselves. We know what it looks like in others. Or is this going to look like, perhaps through a process of, well, I have pride. I'm a spiritual practitioner. I don't want to have pride. So I'm going to quell that pride person. And actually, I hate that pride person. So I am going to smash that pride person into the ground until that pride person has nothing left. And actually, that pride person was so disgusting, I don't know how I ever lived in that body. But you haven't overcome pride. Because you're still grasping to a me that you want to have an identity you can feel proud of. I told you it was insidious, right? It's insidious. And so it's one thing to say, release a thought. It's another thing to say, release me. Release my entire identity. Release the very need to have an identity that I can feel good about or bad about. Because otherwise it's just two poles, and you'll keep bouncing back and forth. Because I like the seesaws better than the coin, because if you press too hard on this one will rise. If you press too hard, if you smash that pride one, the self-loathing will rise. So that's why our Vipassana is so essential in the course of our Shamatha. It's not something just to wait for later. It's something that is delicately, gently, kindly eroding our grasping to an inherent identity all the way through. And so the humility, real humility, deep humility, and I'll be speaking later this evening, quoting from the Desert Fathers and the Byzantine monastic tradition of Greece. They knew a lot about humility as a value, as perhaps the supreme monastic value. It's not saying I'm bad or I'm worthless. That's not humility. Humility is being so utterly at peace with the simplicity of a contemplative way of life. And we've just heard about this, few wants, contentment with what one has. So at peace with the simplicity of one's environment, so at peace with the simplicity of one's activities, simplicity of one's mind, and resting in awareness, whether focusing on the mind as it arises or awareness of awareness, or the stillness of awareness, watching the movements of the breath. The practices come to be very, very similar as you progress along each of them. You start to realize the same process is going to have to happen either way. The simplicity that doesn't have to be doing anything in order to feel worthwhile in the world. That knows there's a ground in which we can dwell, to which we can bear witness, as I was speaking before about prayer, as one is bearing witness to the ultimate stillness, the ultimate pristine awareness through one's conventional or conditioned awareness. That's part of a process of not having to even care anymore whether I'm good or bad at this practice. I don't mean in the sense of virtuous or non-virtuous. Of course one has to be virtuous. But one's not caring anymore about whether I'm successful or unsuccessful. I'd rather use those words. Whether I'm making progress or staying still. Staying still is good for shamatha. So if one's constantly focused on progress, that will impede any actual progress in the path of shamatha. Because to be content with staying just where one is, you get my pun here, to be utterly content with staying where one is the practice. And so if one is in any way focused on, well, how am I doing? Am I progressing along those 9 stages yet? That's a guarantee one won't. So that's really what I wanted to express, the simplicity of humility as simplicity, simplicity as humility. And taken to its nth degree, taken to its most sublime form, would be precisely the humility that rests in the substrate consciousness and doesn't grasp to the substrate consciousness. Can right away see that that's not inherently real either, and plunges into the depths of pristine awareness that is, of course, not limited to any individual. But when one rests there, when one finds it, it is more me than anything we ever thought we were. And this question that has floated through our retreat, you're not who you think you are, but who am I? The Dzogchen answer is, we only find the answer to that question when we are resting in the ultimate ground of pristine awareness. And I'll repeat what I just said. That is more me than anything we ever thought we were. But we won't get there unless we have released grasping, not ceased to be, but released grasping to everything we thought we were. There was one more point there. And I do want to address this. Someone asked about an appropriate motivation in a secular context for practicing shamatha. You may wonder how I'm going to connect these now. But I think at the most basic level, if there are scientists, psychologists, or anybody who is interested in achieving shamatha, setting out on this expedition of discovery without holding any particular religious faith to begin with, as Lama Alan has again and again suggested, is possible. But we still need a motivation, because we don't want it to be the motivation of the person who's about to rob the bank. So I would say at the most basic level, virtue. Wanting to be we have to have the ethical conduct in order to actually reach shamatha anyway. One is not going to reach stage 9 with a non-virtuous motivation. Maybe a little bit of heightened attentional skills, but not stage 9, not actual shamatha. But if one is starting with the simple intent, I want to discover who I am, I want to discover the nature of consciousness, and I hope this can help other people. And I will conduct myself with a pure ethical way of life. That's enough. It's enough. And we know that that can spread across all the bandwidths of human society right now. So that's all I'll say on that, because it's up to the individual situations whether that will lead to insight, intuition, faith, aspiration for a Buddhist path or Christian path or something of more explicitly religious content. We'll start the meditation very soon, but just one last point was a further question about the arising of appearances from the substrate, as Lama Alan explained in detail this morning, and how that's mediated by the body, or in what way is that conditioned by the fact of our human bodies, human brains, and so on. And from a Vajrayana point of view, there are extremely subtle explanations. As I indicated yesterday, or maybe the day before, referring to the chakra systems, that our outer bodies are already an expression of a formation of energies that started in the womb, that formed our body based on the karmic propensities that brought us into this life. So arising from the dream state is analogous to arising from the clear light of death through a bardo, actually the bardo being has to go into the clear light again before the birth process can begin, according to classical Buddhist presentations. That is a much more robust, shall I say, and even coarse process than the analogous process that happens every time we go to sleep, enter the dream state, the dream dissolves, we, as it were, die again, the dream person dies, goes into the clear light of dreamless sleep, and then arises again as you wake up in your room. there, it's very clear that the dream appearances are mere appearances with no physical substrate or correlate, whereas our shared embodied world has a physical correlate. That's what it means to say there are still molecules here. There are still atomic forces here. There's still gravitational forces here. So the way in which our waking appearances are configured is much more robust. That's what I'm starting to say. But to understand this deeply, I think one would have to be, from a Buddhist perspective, one has to go to the Anuttara Yoga Tantra texts, or else the revelations of Lerab Lingpa. They go into great detail as to how this arises. But to think it through for ourselves, I think it's enough just to plant the seed for all of you. There's a karmic energy that passes between lifetimes. And that doesn't have a coarse physical correlate at all. It has very, very subtle energies that pass from lifetime to lifetime. And then once the conditions are complete for birth to take place, and in Tibetan, birth actually refers to entering the womb, not to coming out of the womb, that starts to coagulate. That's the word I want to use, coagulate into a body. And our actions every single day of our lives, what we eat, who we speak to, how we interact, our virtues, our non-virtues, are continuing to condition the physicality of our body. And I'm speaking very much from a Buddhist perspective now. So that we might even start to someday have a neuroscience that's looking at brain cells as configurations of prana. So we're not saying, can't find consciousness in brain cells. We're not making that argument anymore, because that's long ago refuted. But we're looking from the other direction. Well, actually, how is karma? How are the karmic energies from past lives and from our current life continuing to configure our brain? And how, in turn, are the energies passing through our brain cells, our nervous system, our circulatory system, our bones, our muscles, and so on, how are those in turn being configured by our consciousness? And then some of the nyam make more sense, because we see that our body-mind is so intricately connected that the process we're going through in purifying our substrate and its propensities, of course it's going to come out in the body and the mind. So then when one looks, again, at other realms, specifically animals, it can make more sense why the appearances associated with our physical reality will be so different for different species. Because it's not just because they're inherently existent species that were placed there, but we might even be able to start to understand evolution from the point of view of karma. How are different kinds of karma manifesting into what science has called different species on this planet? So a lot of that is speculatory, but as we go deeper into our own experience, our very personal experience of the unexpected things that arise from our mind, to recognize and ask the questions, how is this related to my body? How is this related to my brain cells, my organs, etc.? Some things will never make sense in the path of shamatha because they're just anomalies, and if we try to make sense of them, that's contrary to the instruction. When Lerab Lingpa says, don't over-conceptualize, don't try to make many different designations. It doesn't help in shamatha at all. But for our all understanding of reality, for our compassion, for our deeper and deeper understanding of what are other beings made of, and how are we interacting at a level where we are all the center of our mandalas, but we are very practically influencing each other It's the interface of these mandalas where it gets interesting, where somebody else's perspective isn't influencing my perspective, and my perspective isn't influencing theirs, not just at the cognitive or conceptual level, but down to our very perceptions of matter. So I'll leave that entirely unfinished as a thought, but have fun with it. And we must meditate now. Let your awareness permeate your body. Relaxing down to your own ground, perhaps now felt as a physical ground, gravity, the earth element, relaxing, releasing itself. Opening any places of overt tension, using just the muscles necessary to remain upright in a seated posture. If you're in Shavasana, relaxing every muscle in the body. And notice the stillness that manifests with that relaxation. And very gently, without disturbing that stillness, start to feel the energy of your body. Not moving anything, not adjusting anything, but simply being alive as vibrations of prana within you. If you're seated, very gently rising up through the spine. relaxing into your breath, letting the exhalation release as far as it needs to, comfortably, not forcing the air out, just watching it release. Letting sensations arise in the body wherever they will. As an expression of that process of breathing. And let the mind be silent as it watches the breath release all the way to its end. We're still settling the speech in its natural state. So if we can right away notice that part of the mind that's still talking, very deliberately just let it fall silent. It doesn't have to keep talking now. And as we've done before, very gently open your eyes, looking softly into space. Very aware that the muscles behind the eyes are as relaxed as possible, not staring, not honing in on anything. Your eyes an embodiment of peace. And then if you wish, you may close them again. Of course, they can always stay open, but bring your awareness gently into your heart. And ask yourself, as we've done before, what is it that I seek? And different words or expressions will function differently for each of us. For some, the idea of genuine happiness, eudaimonia, will capture it. I want to know what is the meaning of full, total flourishing. For some, naturally or spontaneously, that goal may be expressed more in terms of others, something we wish to be or do for others. Or it might be much more modest in terms of a sense of deep physical and psychological well-being right here and now. Perhaps not yet our ultimate ground, but our relative embodiment. But ask yourself very clearly what your longing is. And this is an example where an outer sound could actually arise to help us as we let that vibration energize our hearts. Not to think of it as an outer sound, but rather something manifesting within us and driving us towards the object of our heart's longing. And then call upon the form of the teacher for you, the perfect spiritual guide for you. And see that being in seated form, blazing in the sky before you, looking at you with such love, utter openness, gentleness, compassion. Let yourself know there is a being alive now who loves you more than you love yourself, who knows you better than you know yourself. And that can only be an enlightened being, whether they are manifest in human form or manifest in celestial form. And let your heart bow. Express your reverence. And as before, make some offering, the sweetest expression of yourself that you can imagine right now. And it could be your very practice today, your practice of meditation, your practice of listening, a kindness you've exchanged with someone else in the course of this week. It's wonderful to imagine that that is the meaning of our flowers or incense, candlelight. And see the depths at which your sublime teacher is pleased with you for being you in all the manifest ways. We never deny that outermost self. And then looking within yourself as you currently identify yourself. See if there's anything that needs confession, purification. Could be a moment of impatience, a moment of judging another. All the way up to the big blunders of our lives. And check that the four powers, the four forces of confession are complete in your mind. And then letting that go, turn to rejoicing. And today, rejoicing in yourself. Find one quality, one habitual action through your life in which you can really rejoice. Especially the things that we have done for years or decades over and over and over again. It's so important to rejoice in that virtue, that good karma. And for the rejoicing increases its power. And then looking into the eyes of our teacher, ask this being to become fully manifest to you. To guide you, to teach you, to support you in your deepest aspirations and practice. And then ask that being to bless you, transforming the very capacity of your mind stream to become more clearly what you are at your depths. See that being of light come to the crown of your head. feeling the warmth of absolute love hovering above you. And then see that being descend within your central channel to rest at the level of your heart. Give your heart away. Let it be inhabited by the sublime being whom you love, utterly free of attachment, but whom you love as the embodiment of love. You love as the inspirer of divine love, the one who will open your own heart completely. Let this blazing being of divine light melt your heart. And then gradually lighten the intensity of your concentration on this being, as though that light is spreading through your body, illuminating your body and mind, but you're no longer focusing closely in the area of your heart. But feel the stillness that is the pristine awareness at the core of the holy being you have called to enter your heart. And know that pristine awareness is non-dual from your own. And rest in that stillness, a stillness that can never move, and is actually not located anywhere. Wherever you look, you will find the stillness of pristine awareness. So rest as that stillness encompasses you, outside, inside, and simply be aware. Of that awareness. Knowing that what we perceive now is not pristine awareness, but it is an intimation. It is experienced with reverence for. The pristine awareness of which it is a ray. We hover on a ray of pristine awareness. And letting your reverence, your devotion for this ray become so full it becomes an object of single-pointed concentration, awareness of awareness, soaked in devotion, grounded in divine love. So we'll finish there. There's no need to get set up back in your seat. Just one last comment on this meditation. I hope you see how it is completely in keeping with everything we've done today, especially, in meditation today. But it's a way to combine the instructions that are actually right on the page where we left off from Panchen Rinpoche about dissolving the Guru into your heart and then going straight into Shamatha and the lineage of Mahamudra. I hope you can see how seamless the transition could be when we realize that the object of our devotion, if at root that is the Dharmakaya, that is pristine awareness, and that stillness is already within us. And even though we are simply being aware of being aware, exactly as you've heard today, it's not necessarily something exalted because we can't force ourselves to see pristine awareness. We can't see it before we're ready. We can't realize it before we're ready. And indeed, as we saw, to be introduced in a formal way to pristine awareness too soon has its dangers. But with faith, with aspiration, with admiration, then the blessings, by resting in that awareness, then the blessings of the Buddha are being transmitted to us in our shamatha practice in a continuous flow. So I hope that makes sense.